Dang all YouTubers again. What's up? I'm Bear. Got a question from a guy who's a patron, which typically I answer Patreon questions on Patreon. I thought it was a pretty good question. We're going to refer to this guy as John Travolta so that I don't use his real name, because I don't think he wants his real name out there. So John said, we're looking at 80 acres with TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, I'm guessing, 161 kV lines in East Tennessee. They run through the center of the northeast corner, yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to OPSEC him here with this stuff. Do you have thoughts or opinions about TVA easement to property for brush clearance or any potential health hazards from EMF? Is that even real as debated in some circles? From a risk-reward perspective, there are many benefits to the property, including water, security, volume of acreage for a reasonable price. Insight from folks like yourself outside of our community is helpful as we're a bit divided and conflicted about the power line issue. Signed, John Travolta, world-famous actor. So, let's start with 161 kV lines. That's 161,000 volts. A kilovolt is 1,000 volts. Power lines are rated in kV or kVA. kVA is really hot stuff because it's volts and amps. So, having worked on 69 kVA, 115 kV, and 230 kVA lines in a previous life, back before I made badass Made in America first aid kits, I can tell you for a fact, although the industry would lose their ever-loving minds if they heard me say this out loud, yes, live power lines are dangerous, and not just don't touch them dangerous to be around. On a 230 kVA line, for example, like what we put in Connecticut, I forget the name of that project, but ran through Bridgeport, Connecticut, Naugatuck, Saugatuck, Bridgeport, and across the Long Island Sound into Sayreville, New Jersey, to a DC haul there. That stuff, 230 kVA, once it's energized, you're not allowed to work around that for more than 6 weeks continuous because, insider secret, you will get cancer. It's just a matter of time. Usually cancer of the guts, somewhere in between your junk and your throat. Somewhere in there, you're going to get cancer. Now, 230 kVA is super hot. That's big cable. I think the outside diameter of that cable was 7 3/4 inches. The diameter of the cable with a conductor the size of my wrist. In the center, really big, very, very, very hot stuff. So 161 kV is not 230 kVA, but it's pretty freaking hot. It also matters how many phases you have. And so typically you're going to have like a minimum of 3 phases, usually on what's called a monopole, like a big metal pole that's sticking up. Then it'll have arms hanging off the side with insulators that carry 3 phases and oftentimes a neutral above that. If it's 12 phase, 15 phase, 18 phase, that's not 161 kVA anymore. You know, that's 2000 kV. It's a big deal. It's a lot of electricity. So anecdotally, this is not scientific, you know, right down to the brass tacks, but anecdotally, I have worked for several people who, like landowners on jobs. And those landowners have had cattle, have had sheep, horses in one instance, and they have all relayed to me that the animals that spend the most time underneath the power lines oftentimes have health issues. Some of the horse people, they had 6-phase 69 kVA, or kV rather, in their backyard behind their horse barn. And their argument was, and again, I can't substantiate this, I'm not a horse semen professional, nor do I want to be a horse semen professional. Some things are better left to nature. But their argument was that the power lines were making their studs sterile. And apparently they were horse semen experts. They had, you know, electron microscopes and rubber gloves. Blech. And there was their firm belief that the power lines were making their stud horses sterile. I've heard anecdotes of people who have had cattle get like growths and goiters on them, usually in the neck and the throat region. Now, there's a significant rate of die-off from the power line. So if you're this close to it, it's definitely going to affect you. EMF is real. Electromagnetic frequency is real. Basic tenet of electricity. You can't have electricity without some form of magnetism, and you can't have magnetism without some force of electricity. Oftentimes, those two rates between magnetism and the flow of electrons, they're not equal, but they are coexistent. They do exist, right? So EMF, electromagnetic frequency, is very real and very quantifiable. You can take your standard distribution line, like what powers your neighborhood, take a coat hanger, wrap it around the end of an old 2-pin fluorescent light bulb. Don't touch the contacts. Just wrap one end around the fluorescent light bulb, bend the other end in the J-hook, and hang it on the line. And the EMFs, the electromagnetic frequencies in the air, will power that light bulb. Depending on the line, they might cause the light bulb to explode. Also, kids, don't try this at home, especially if you don't have an insulated bucket lift like a 55-foot High Ranger and some hot gloves. Okay? But the closer you are to it, the much more EMF there is. It's concentrated around the conductor. As you get away from it, it falls off. So now 10 foot away, it's far less effective, far less intrusive than it is up close. 100 foot away, it dies off even more significantly. 1,000 foot away, no problem. Don't worry about it. So the question then becomes, so to your first question, is there something to electromagnetic frequencies and negative effects on livestock and human beings? That's 100% real, in my experience. The power companies will never tell you that, because if they did, there'd be a class action lawsuit to the tune of trillions of dollars, and they'd be bankrupt. There'd be no electricity, and we'd have Civil War 3.0 or whatever. The zombies will eat your children, whatever would happen. But that's super duper real. Super real. So yes, negative health effects on people and livestock. My dad, anecdotally, my dad was in telecom back in the day. And he was on the team that put the first microwave communication systems in place for the commercial market. And they shot with a microwave dish. They shot a beam from New York City to Boston, Massachusetts, from one bank to another bank. Because that was like the fastest communications at the time, the widest bandwidth at the time, right? Rather than old copper wires. Got a microwave beam, man. We can insider trader with the best of them now. Everybody on that team that implemented that first microwave system, every single person, including my dad, got some kind of cancer in between their dangly bits in their throat. Imagine that. If you know somebody who climbs cell phone towers, ask them about RF burn. It's real. Now, all this stuff's real, which is why, when you're walking around with this thing in your pocket held up to your ear all day, wondering, I don't feel so good. Might be able to make a suggestion. Now, the next question is, should this keep you from purchasing the property? Depends. Depends on what, Bear? Well, what are you going to do with it? So you said it's the northeast corner of that property. Cool. What are you going to put over there? They run through the center of the northeast corner. What are you going to do over there? If you're going to graze livestock over there, you're probably okay. If your prize stud horses and breeding stock are over there, you might consider not using that part of the property for that. I wouldn't build a house under it. I wouldn't build a barn under it. That would be a problem for me. I would not be cool with that. But if it's on the back side of the property and you're gonna hay that part of the pasture to make hay for your livestock, cool. I think that'd be just fine. So it really depends on what you're going to do with the property as far as whether or not the positioning of those lines is a deal breaker for you. I don't know what your intents are with the property, but I wouldn't do something that's critical to life or limb underneath or near those high tension power wires, transmission lines. Because again, 161 kV is not a joke. That's a lot of power. Now, you asked about access for brush clearing, etc. Yes, there will be an easement. If there's a power line there's already an easement in place. Cool. Couple of things with that. The first is you don't really have to worry about that area getting all built up and overgrown. They will take care of that. Very likely, now, word to the wise, very likely, they will send spray crews through on occasion to spray a chemical that literally gives biological matter, including plants, cancer so that it dies. I spent one day of my life with a sprayer backpack full of that stuff on my back, and by the end of the day, I was so sick to my stomach, I decided I am never going to do this again. Negative. Not doing it. Also, coincidentally, just, doing that kind of stuff, growing up in the telecom and power construction industry, I got colon cancer at 26. I'm sure it's a coincidence. I'm sure one had nothing to do with the other, right? Well, your dad was genetically predisposed, there's the words. You're genetically predisposed because your dad also got colon cancer as a young man. Yes, true. He also worked in the telecom and power construction industry. Contribute stress, lack of sleep, and a poor diet to that, and you're going to get cancer. But the defoliant agent that is sprayed in that right-of-way, if they're spraying, stay the hell away from it. So I would look at what the watershed looks like on that part of the property to the remainder of your property. If water is shedding from the area with the high tension lines to your stock tanks, to your ponds, to your creeks, to your underground aquifers for your wells, that's a deal breaker for me. If it's shedding away from there, these are the things that people do, and I'm sure there's somebody typing furiously in the comments right now. I can't believe, given all this information, Bear, that people still do this. Do you want cheap electricity? This is what it takes in order to have cheap electricity. I'm not saying I approve of it. I'm not in that industry anymore, am I? But this is what it takes to have cheap electricity. So if the water is shedding away from there, probably not a deal breaker either, but I would definitely have a way to keep my livestock out of that area for when defoliant is sprayed. Additionally, yes, there will probably be line clearance crews that come through every 5 to 10 years. More likely on a 10-year cycle, but every 5 to 10 years. So because there's an easement, there will be access. There will probably be a locked gate through the right-of-way every mile through the right-of-way, or a gate that should be locked every mile through the right-of-way, and they will come through there with heavy equipment, and looks like a circular saw blade on the end of a fiberglass boom mounted to a log skidder, and or a Rayco or whatever else, and just trim all the trees back so they don't touch the high tension power lines. There's a benefit to having those lines on your property. If the power ever goes out, or if there's a storm, you can bet your tuchus that you will be one of the first people who are restored to power because of that easement, because line crews are going to be all through that area during the time of a natural disaster, and that generally will serve to help put you at the top of the list of getting service restored to your barn, to your house, to your chicken coop, to your whatever, because you're there, and typically speaking, the problems that can be seen are the ones that get addressed. So there is an upside to that. So as far as would I or would I not buy the property, I don't know enough based upon what you've told me to make that decision. But I do know I would not site a house underneath those power lines. I would not site a barn underneath those power lines. And I would not, for me personally, if the watershed is from that right-of-way, which is likely going to be sprayed with chemical defoliants, from the right-of-way to wherever my stock tanks, my ponds, my creeks, my streams, my lakes, or my wells/aquifers are at, I'm out, because I know that stuff gives people cancer. Now, he says this holding a Fat Bottom Betty Gordo cigar. How hypocritical of you, Bear. Yeah, well, if I'm going to get cancer, I'm going to do it on my terms, not somebody else's, all right? So hopefully, John Travolta, this has been useful for you. I'm interested in your productive comments down below. If you live underneath or near transmission lines, high tension power lines, and you've seen some strange things, as far as the health and well-being of people and livestock in those areas, please drop that in the comments down below. And I'm much more interested in you've seen it with your own eyeballs than I've read on a blog post one time in 2006. I don't care. And neither does John Travolta. Don't care either. So, that's what I got for you, man. If you're interested in this style of video, you like this, we do this on Patreon 3 times a week. We do a post every month called Give Me Your Questions, where you ask questions like this and then I respond to them. But I thought it was a pretty good question, so I answered it. By the way, you see the little babies right there? Can you see them? Look, at the little itty bitty babies. See him? One just lifted his head up. Their names are Sukkot 1 and Sukkot 2. Because at some point, they will be living in Mobile. Bless y'all. Shalom.